International law is the collection of rules and agreements that govern how countries interact with one another. It also covers international organizations, businesses, and, in some cases, individual people. Unlike domestic law, international law does not come from one global government. There is no world parliament passing laws for every country, and there is no single international police force enforcing them. Instead, international law comes from several different sources. The first and most obvious source is treaties. A treaty is a written agreement between countries. Countries negotiate the terms, sign the agreement, and usually go through a formal process called ratification before becoming legally bound by it. Examples include the United Nations Charter, the Geneva Conventions, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and agreements controlling international trade. However, treaties generally only bind the countries that have agreed to them. The second source is customary international law. These are rules that may not be written in one specific agreement but have developed because countries consistently follow them and believe they are legally required to do so. For example, countries generally recognize that foreign diplomats should receive certain protections. These rules existed through international custom long before many of them were written into treaties. The third source is general principles of law. These are basic legal ideas found across many different legal systems, such as acting in good faith, providing a fair hearing, or not benefiting from your own wrongdoing. International courts may use these principles when treaties or customary rules do not provide a clear answer. International law covers much more than wars between countries. International human rights law protects basic rights such as freedom of expression, equality, and protection from torture. International humanitarian law, including the Geneva Conventions, establishes rules for armed conflict. It protects civilians, prisoners of war, wounded soldiers, and medical workers. International trade law regulates tariffs, imports, exports, subsidies, and trade disputes. The law of the sea determines where countries can fish, drill for resources, control shipping, and claim maritime territory. Environmental law deals with shared problems such as pollution, climate change, and damage that crosses national borders. International criminal law allows individuals to be prosecuted for serious crimes such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. There is also private international law. This deals with disputes involving people or businesses in different countries. For example, if a Canadian company sues a company in France, private international law helps determine which country's courts should hear the case and which country's laws should apply. So, who enforces all of this? There are several international courts and institutions, but each has a different role. The International Court of Justice hears legal disputes between countries. However, it usually only has authority when the countries involved have accepted its jurisdiction. The International Criminal Court is different. It prosecutes individuals accused of the most serious international crimes. It does not put entire countries on trial. The World Trade Organization handles disputes involving international trade. There are also regional human rights courts, international tribunals, United Nations bodies, and national courts that apply international law. But international law has a major limitation. These institutions often depend on countries to cooperate. The International Criminal Court, for example, does not have its own police force. If it issues an arrest warrant, it usually relies on national governments to make the arrest. The International Court of Justice can issue a legally binding judgment, but enforcing that judgment may still depend on diplomacy, political pressure, economic sanctions, or action through the United Nations. This is why international law can sometimes appear weak. Powerful countries may ignore judgments, refuse to join certain treaties, or block action through political institutions. But that does not mean international law is meaningless. Most international rules are followed every day without making the news. Countries recognize passports, protect diplomats, deliver international mail, follow aviation rules, respect shipping routes, complete international business transactions, and cooperate on criminal investigations. Global travel, trade, communication, and diplomacy would be far more difficult without these shared rules. International law works partly because countries benefit from predictability. A country may want to break a rule today, but it also wants other countries to follow that same rule tomorrow. Countries can also face consequences for violations. These may include sanctions, trade restrictions, damaged diplomatic relationships, financial penalties, criminal prosecution, or loss of international support. So international law is not the same as the law inside a country. It is more decentralized, more dependent on cooperation, and often more influenced by politics. But it is still a real legal system. It provides rules for war, peace, trade, human rights, oceans, diplomacy, the environment, and international crime. Cannot prevent every conflict or punish every violation. But without it, relations between countries would depend far more heavily on power alone. International law is essentially the shared rulebook for a world made up of independent countries. The rulebook is imperfect, and not every player follows it. But without that rulebook, the international system would be far more unpredictable and far more dangerous.